pleased to be at this important conference at the invitation of Tamir Hyman. Let me make just a couple of comments. I've been lucky enough to work with my chairman, Frank Lowy, chairman of the Lowy Institute, also chairman of INSS, and his family for 23 years. And Frank is a giant figure in Australia. For me, he's my boss, my friend, my mentor, and a mensch. And with Stephen Lowy and Mark Ryan, another colleague, in the last couple of days, I have travelled from the north to the south of this beautiful country, from the Golan and the Upper Galilee to the site of the Nova Festival and kibbutz near Oz. And I have to tell you that in all these places, when I've spoken with soldiers and kibbutznik and ordinary people, I have been very impressed to witness their gvura. And I've also seen how Israelis, when presented with a choice between life and death, between blessing and curse, choose life. Ubachata b'chaim. It's very generous of you to applaud my terrible Hebrew. Thank you very much. So enough about that. This panel is about Trump 2.0. It's about Donald Trump's world in which we are all now living. Let me make a couple of comments myself, and then I'm going to go to the panel. Like everything in life, Trump has good aspects and bad aspects. I know that many Israelis I've spoken to will feel that Trump supports you. He's with you. I know that last time his administration negotiated the Abraham Accords. And this time, I know that he is saying things that are disrupting the old politics of the Middle East and forcing other actors in the region to look at old problems through new lenses. But I have to be honest with you and say, as an Australian, for me, the warning lights are flashing red. I was in the room at the Munich Security Conference with Zippy and Tamir when J.D. Vance walked away from the European democracies and then met with the leader of the far right-wing party in Germany. As an Americophile, this does not sit well with me. As an historian, this doesn't sit well with me. I met President Zelensky at Munich. It doesn't sit well with me that Trump called Zelensky a dictator who started the war. Today is the first day of the fourth year of that war that was initiated by Putin, the fourth year. I don't like to see the United States vote in the Security Council to protect Russia. I don't want to see President Trump in Red Square on May Day. And I guess the question that I ask myself, and maybe we all need to ask ourselves, is who will Trump throw overboard next? And I think the answer is anyone he cares to, because I don't think that Mr. Trump is anything larger than himself. He's not guided by principle. And when the country at the center of the border doesn't care about principle, then I fear that everything falls away. So, I know Australians are usually sunny and optimistic, but I'm feeling a bit pessimistic. But we have a panel here who maybe they're going to set me straight. Maybe they will tell me that I'm wrong. We have 21 minutes to go, and I've warned the panel that I'm going to be an activist chair. I know that in Israel, everybody is a prime minister, but in this panel, I'm the only chair. I said to the ambassador, this panel is a democracy, but it's a guided democracy. So I've asked the panelists to be as brief as possible so we can get through as many topics as possible. I want to begin with the ambassador. Ambassador, thank you for joining us. It's an honor to have you here with us. At the start of Trump's first term, he was a China hawk. But for most of his time, he said nice things about China, actually, and about Xi Jinping. And we know that he likes doing deals. So let me ask you about the most important bilateral relationship in the world, in my opinion, between the United States and China. Is there a chance of Donald Trump doing a grand bargain with Beijing? And what would that look like, Ambassador?
Chinese President Xi Jinping held a phone talks with President Trump before his inauguration. So this is what I know for his second terms. So to be honest, I have no any idea about this, but I think Trump administration's negotiation or with the other major powers maybe could showcase or give us some lessons. What should we do? Trump's team uses diplomacy of deal to deal with international issues. So China actually is on his list. So taking the Russia and the Ukraine conflict as an example, they believe that between Russia's sovereignty concern and the priority of US over Ukrainians' mineral resources, they can make a deal between these two things. So their political design, I mean the US political design to put an end to the war or conflict is of transaction nature, of which the relevant stakeholders are excluded. So addressing hotspot issues from the perspective of pursuing US interests might seem to work for a while to de-escalate the tensions, but will also breed the higher danger for a new round of conflict down the road.
Okay.
So we just look.
Okay, and let me ask you a very quick question. Yesterday, President Xi Jinping had a video conference with President Putin of Russia. Now, some scholars in America think that the reason President Trump is being so nice to President Putin is to create a breach between Russia and China. Do you think that could ever happen?
I think some of the scholars and experts believe in this, but from my personal view, I don't believe this. I don't think this will happen because China and Russia are neighbors. We are neighbors. We have more than 43,000 kilometers border lines, and the total trade volume between us reached it's more than 200 billion US dollars. And the most important factors I want to mention is that China pursues the principles of non-alignment in diplomacy. So even when the Russians are in difficulties, so we refused to establish the alliance with them.
Okay.
I think this will make all of those efforts or conspiracy to separate these two countries fail.
Okay, sorry, Donald, you're not going to be able to separate Russia and China. Mohammed, the ambassador said that Mr. Trump believes in the diplomacy of, and he believes in real estate. And he has said in relation to Gaza, for example, that America would like to take an ownership position in Gaza. Talk to us about the importance of land in diplomacy and how you think this will translate into this region.
Well, thank you for this question and thank you for having me here. I mean, he might be true that everything is about business and about deals, but if he's so successful businessman, then he would know that even in deals, you have to know, first of all, who are your partners in that deal, who are the parties to talk to about the deal, and then even in business, you have to be very sophisticated about some cultural sentiments. And speaking of cultural sentiments, I dare to say that in many places in the world, I don't want to say in all of them, but I dare to say in many of them, when you speak about land, you're not necessarily speaking about real estate in the business terms, but you speak about culture, you speak about dignity, you speak about honor, you speak about history, you speak about your self-development. That's one important thing. And this is true in general, but it is true in the context of the Middle East. And we all know about that in both contexts, for the Arab side and for the Jewish side. Now, if I want to mud the water more and I start speaking about businesses, then in businesses, you do business with somebody, usually with the one who has the good quote-to-quote or real estate that you would like to speak about or to trade. And that other side is the Palestinian people. Right now, of course, they are represented by the PLO. And to the best of my knowledge, President Trump has not been in touch with President Mahmoud Abbas, be as legitimate or illegitimate as he might be, but internationally speaking, he is the president of the Palestinian people. And he hasn't been in touch with him speaking about that. Right now, he's been speaking to King Abdullah, President Sisi in Egypt, and others in the Arab world, but so far he's not been speaking to the Palestinian people. And the Palestinian people cannot be the means; they are the ends by the end of the day. Speak clearly. I have lots of respect to my country. I'm Israeli, and we have a parliament, we have a government, and I don't expect that a president be as dignified as he might be, like President of the United States, big brother for us, to tell us what to do. He has to talk to us about things. We have to discuss things within our inner institutes, and that includes not the government only, but the parliament as well.
All right, thank you. Avishai, let me bring you in, and let me ask you to address maybe the question or some of the statements that I made at the beginning. To bring this back for an Israeli audience, why would Israelis care? Why should Israelis care if Mr. Trump plays a bit fast and loose? They might say, well, it's one thing for the Ukrainians, it's one thing for the Europeans, but Mr. Trump is in our corner. So why do Israelis have something at stake in the broader question of how Mr. Trump conducts himself in the world?
It's an incredibly fair question, seeing as so far how we beneficiate so much of this upheaval that Trump has brought into the region. The first thing I'll say is it's not entirely clear to any of us whether Trump is in Israel's corner or Trump is in Trump's corner, and currently it aligns with Israeli interests. And I'm concerned, I'm not going to say I'm terribly afraid, but I am concerned that there might come a point where things will come apart and this sort of erratic way of conducting policy will not play out in our favor. There's something to be said in the world of business as well as in the world of diplomacy for set expectations within bounds. The other thing I would note, or a couple of other things to point out, is one, Trump is an ocean away from here. And some of the instability caused by ideas floated in Washington, if they destabilize Egypt, if they destabilize Jordan, are going to play out in our back. And that's to be weary of. On top of that, I would note two other things. One, and not to cover everything, is that Israel depends more than many Israelis realize on the international organizations and the international institutions and the international order that the U.S. has maintained after the Second World War. And that is a world order that is coming apart now. Just consider for a fact what happens when Israel's main trading partner, the EU, is on one side of the conversation and the U.S. is on another side of the conversation. Where do we fall when that happens? The other question I would put ourselves is, many Israelis spent the last 2.5 years, especially prior to October 7th, protesting some changes to the structure of Israeli government. Similar changes, albeit on a much grander, much faster pace, are happening in the US right now. And when those changes to the meaning of democracy in the world's oldest stable democracy play out and become entrenched, it might come with us. And that's something that we have to be ready for and ask ourselves, what is the price in terms of international politics that we're willing to pay in order to, or in terms of domestic democracy, that we're willing to pay for the benefits that we gain in terms of some leeway in our geopolitics.
Thank you. Ambassador, let me come back to you on the question of tariffs. We know that Mr. Trump likes tariffs. In fact, he said that tariff is the most beautiful word in the English dictionary. I thought love was the most beautiful word in the English dictionary, or Fullilove indeed, but it's tariff. Ambassador, Mr. Trump has imposed a general tariff on Chinese goods. We're hearing about levies in the future on other exports. China has responded. How concerned are you about a tit-for-tat trade war taking place?
Trump's team negotiates with the trade and economic cooperation partners of the U.S. I mean, when his team, negotiated with the trade and economic cooperation partners of the U.S., always talks about how it is a bad deal, emphasizing only by emphasizing only the trade deficit and the loss of the job opportunities. So without any mentioning of the economic benefits, political influence, and the geopolitical dividends the U.S. has gained in the process. So the U.S. always says that their trade deficit with China has harmed the U.S. interests. However, the export of Chinese goods with good quality and reasonable price to the U.S. has contributed a lot to controlling the inflation and benefiting people's lives in the U.S. in the past 2 decades. So it's really a very dangerous thing. Intend to turn back the clock. As you mentioned, some scholars or agencies in the United States is proposing to expel China out of the WTO, and then if they cannot reach their intention, maybe they will propose to suspend the most favored nation agreement with China. And then if that failed, they will continue to stop the mutual investment agreement with China, signed in the 1980s. So that's the reason why I said it's a really dangerous intent to turn back the clock.
All right, thank you. Mohammed, I'd like to ask you about the point that Avishai finished on, which goes to the quality of democracy in the United States. The United States, Israel, Australia, all members of the family of democracies. A lot of people, or some people, are worried about democracy in the United States. I've been in the United States for many years. Are you worried, and what lessons should we take from the election for our own democracies?
I take a breath because I do comparative law, comparative constitution law, and comparative law, but I'd like to focus on constitution law in this perspective. In Israel, our democracy has been evolved primarily through the Supreme Court cases. To a great extent based on comparative studies, lending some good ideas from the constitutional law, from the biggest democracy in the globe, as we used to say, America. But it was not for us an open buffet of pick and choose. We studied the American constitutional law very well, and we knew in 1995, for instance, to decide promptly that separate but equal cannot be equal, citing Plessy versus Ferguson, but not citing Brown versus Board of Education and not Plessy versus Ferguson. The trouble is that why there has been a golden age in the American Constitution democratic regime, I am very afraid that there is a U-turn there. And that U-turn has to be about perceiving democracy in very nationalistic way on the one hand, and another formalistic way on the other hand. And that's a tragedy, because it has been the source for many democracies, and I just mentioned Israel, but I could also refer to Australia. I could refer to Canada. I could refer to Germany, to Italy, to France. Usually continental legal systems are very conservative, but here they open their minds to borrow some good concepts from the American constitutional law, and things are changing now. And we see that as well by attacking the self-independence of the Supreme Court and by trying to affect the appointments to the Supreme Court to make it a very conservative one, a very formalistic one.
All right, very, very good. We're almost out of time, and I want to squeeze in a couple more questions. Why don't you come in on that, Avishai? You also in the United States, living in Cambridge. When you look back at the last election, how do you feel? Was it a great expression of democracy? Do you worry about domestic institutions in the United States? And what does this mean for people in this room?
So, since we can't cover all of this in the span of however minutes we have, it was an expression of democracy in the sense that Trump was elected with a popular majority, not an unusually large one, but an unusually large one for a Republican candidate in the last 20 or 30 years. I am worried, though, for domestic institutions, because to go back to what Mohammed said about the formalistic view of democracy, the view that says, I want a majority, therefore I can do whatever I want, sidesteps about 250 years of gained wisdom, if we want to be conservative about our thinking about institutions, about what it means to be a democracy and how you balance the various elements that operate within a democracy. And right now there is a move within American politics or within American institutions to concentrate power in an extreme way in the hands of the presidency in a way that didn't exist in American politics before and was even predicted and worried by American founders. And the concern that I have about it from an Israeli perspective, setting aside the issue of quality of democracy and how that gets interpreted in our own domestic politics, but from an interest point of view, is that in doing so, a lot of the elements of American power, as it has formed after the Second World War, education, research, science, being at the center of an international network of institutions that all lead back to Washington and give Washington an influence that Israel benefits off of, all of that is being taken apart in light of a coherent view, but one that leaves us at the periphery of this world with an America that is less central to the places in which we find challenges. And that's something I worry about.
All right, thank you very much, Avishai. Ambassador, you're going to get the last question. I'm going to ask you a cheeky question, if you don't mind, about Australia. Because while I've been here in Israel, some Chinese friends have been visiting Australia. And what I mean is the Chinese Navy has some warships off the east coast of Australia, just a couple of 100 kilometres off Sydney, doing some exercises. Now, what does this have to do with President Trump? Well, Australia, like many countries, balances our security relationship with the United States on the one hand and our economic relationship with China on the other hand. And a lot of Australians are worried about President Trump. But this kind of behaviour from China also worries Australians. So what's that all about, Ambassador? Why are those ships there?
Yeah, I saw this report. The drill is going on off the east coastline of Australia. But I have to say that this drill is carried out in a safe, standard, and professional manner, in accordance with the international laws and the international practices. Actually, I also noticed in the past few years several reports about Australian Navy ships, navigated off Chinese coastlines. So I think this is a very friendly interaction between us. Don't worry about this. Don't worry about this.
Okay.
and
All
to
right.
be honest, I just want to make some.
Ambassador, I
additional-
have to cut you off. I'm sorry. We're out of time. Thank you for answering my cheeky question. I hope that China and other countries in the region are not too worried about the superpower Australia and our naval exercises off their coasts. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a great discussion. The final piece of wisdom I will give you, I don't think it comes from the Torah, but it does come from somebody very wise, and that is that regardless of what situation you're in, regardless of how bad it appears, this too shall pass. And so when President Trump tweets something that I disagree with, or he does something I disagree with, I think to myself, the Trump administration, this too shall pass. So ladies and gentlemen, toda rabah, thank you for listening. See you soon.